Emily Carter sat at the kitchen table in her Atlanta apartment, staring at her empty dinner plate. It was 7 p.m. on April 12, 2018. It was drizzling outside, and the streetlights were reflecting off the puddles. David, her husband, was in the living room on his laptop, connected to a video call with colleagues. His voice was coming out in fragments. "Yeah, I checked the code. I have to fix the bug by tomorrow." Emily glanced at him through the open door. Dark hair, glasses slid down his nose. He was as absorbed in his work as ever. Emily, a 30-year-old marketing executive, felt out of place. Their 5-year marriage was falling apart. She wanted freedom, adventure, while David lived for his career, oblivious to her drifting away. For the past month, she had been secretly dating Ryan Glover, a musician who played in bars. His talk of a new life in Miami, without bills and schedules, sounded like salvation. Today, she was going to meet him to finally decide whether to leave or stay. But looking at David, she felt a pang of guilt. Emily stood up, put her plate in the sink, and dried her hands. She had already thought of an excuse. She would say she was going to a meeting with colleagues about a new project. She had been working late at work for the past few weeks, and David had grown accustomed to her not being home until 10. Her bag of clothes, jeans, t-shirts, some cash was already in the trunk of her car, hidden 2 days ago. She didn't want to risk packing it in front of David. She walked into the living room, where David was talking into his headphones, looking at the screen. "David," she said, trying to sound normal. He raised a finger, not looking up from the screen. "1 second, Em. Yes, Tom, I'm listening. Go on." Emily waited, arms crossed. Finally, he took off his headphones and looked at her. "What? Is everything okay?" "I'm going to meet the guys from the department," she said. "New client, we need to discuss the campaign. I'll be back late." David nodded, rubbing his eyes. "Oh, I see. Well, good luck. I'll probably be here until midnight. This project is a nightmare." "I understand," she replied, forcing a smile. "Don't stay too late." "I'll try," he said, already putting on his headphones. "See you later." Emily turned, her heart pounding. He hadn't even asked where she was going. Maybe that was for the best. She grabbed her purse and keys and walked out into the hallway, leaving her phone on the nightstand by the door. She had decided not to take it. No calls, no trace. Her credit cards and driver's license were in the drawer too. If she was going to leave with Ryan, she needed to disappear. Emily parked outside the Rusty Anchor, a bar on the outskirts of Atlanta. It was 9 o'clock at night, and the music was blaring through the thin walls. She sat at a table in the corner, fiddling with the strap of her purse. Ryan was late, as usual. Emily pulled out the old push-button phone she'd bought last week with cash. She only used it to call Ryan, so David wouldn't see her messages. The screen was blank, no new messages. She glanced at the bar where a couple of guys were drinking beer. The smell of cigarettes and fries hung in the air. Emily was nervous. What if Ryan didn't show up? What if she was risking everything for nothing? But the thought of going home to David and their routine was unbearable. The bar door opened and Ryan walked in. He was tall, wearing a worn leather jacket and his hair pulled back into a ponytail. He spotted her, smiled, and walked over to the table. Emily felt the tension ease. "Hey, Em," he said, sitting down across from her. "Sorry, rehearsal ran late. Should I order you something?" "No, I'm fine," she said, looking at his hands. The guitar tattoo on his wrist seemed so alive, so different from her world. "So, what do you say?" Ryan leaned closer. "Are you ready? Miami awaits. Beaches, sunsets, no offices. We'll live the way we want." Emily clutched her purse. I don't know, Ryan. This is a big step. What if this is a mistake?" He laughed, leaning back in his chair. "A mistake? Are you serious? You said to yourself that you were suffocating at home. Your husband doesn't even notice you're here. When was the last time you felt alive?" She looked down. He was right. With David, she felt like a shadow. But leaving meant leaving everything. Her family, her job, her past. "What if I can't?" she asked quietly. "What if I change my mind?" Ryan took her hand, his fingers warm. "Look, I'm not forcing you, but you're here. You made a choice. If you go back, nothing will change. You'll regret it, Em. I know it." She looked at him, then at the door. Her heart was pounding. She imagined David at his laptop, their apartment, the bills on the table. And she said, "Okay, I'm coming." "When?" Ryan's smile widened. "Today. My friend gave me the car. We'll pick up your stuff, and then we'll go. So, are you coming with me?" Emily nodded, feeling her insides tighten. "Yes, with me." Emily came home quietly. It was almost 2 in the morning. David was asleep in the bedroom. The door was slightly open. She could hear him even breathing. The lamp was on in the living room. David's laptop was turned off apparently. He finished work and went to bed. Emily went to the kitchen, took out a piece of paper and a pen. She wanted to write something to explain, but the words wouldn't come. She started, "David, I'm sorry. I can't live like this. I have to go. Don't look for me." But she stopped. If she left a note, he would look. The police, questions, and she didn't want to be found. Not now. She crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. Emily walked into the bedroom. Her bag was already in the trunk of her car, but she wanted to grab one more thing, an old sweatshirt she loved. She opened the closet, moving silently. Then she walked over to the bed. David was asleep, facing the wall. His glasses were on the nightstand, next to an unfinished book on programming. Emily looked at him, her throat tightening. She went back into the kitchen, took the crumpled letter from the trash can, and tore it into tiny pieces. Then she threw them back, making sure there was nothing left. Emily went out into the hallway, closed the apartment door, and went down to the car where Ryan was waiting. The rain had stopped, and the air was cool. She got into the passenger seat, and Ryan started the engine. "Ready?" he asked, looking at the road. Emily nodded without looking back. "Yes." The car started moving, and the apartment disappeared into the darkness. David Carter woke at 7 a.m. on April 13, 2018, to the sound of his alarm clock. The bed next to him was empty. He stretched, expecting to hear the sound of running water in the bathtub or the smell of coffee in the kitchen, but the apartment was silent. Emily, his wife, had gone to a meeting with colleagues the night before and promised to be back late. David, busy with a work video call, went to bed around midnight without waiting for her. He figured she was probably staying with a friend or had returned while he was already asleep. He stood up, put on his glasses, and walked into the living room. The laptop was on the table next to an unfinished mug of tea. Emily was gone. Her purse, which she usually left on the nightstand, was gone too. David frowned, took out his phone, and dialed her number. After a few rings, the answering machine came on. "This is Emily. Leave a message." Where are you?" he said, trying not to panic. "Call me when you hear." He walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, then closed it. Something was wrong. Emily always left a note if she was late. He went back to the bedroom, looked in the closet. Her clothes were still hanging, but the old gym bag she sometimes took to the gym was gone. David went into the bathroom, then into the living room, checking every corner. On the nightstand by the door was her smartphone, the one she never forgot. Next to it was her wallet with her credit cards and driver's license. "What the hell?" he muttered, opening his wallet. Everything was there. She couldn't leave without her phone and money. David walked back into the kitchen, noticed the trash can under the sink. At the very top were small scraps of paper. He pulled them out and laid them out on the table. It was a sheet of paper from their notebook, torn into pieces. He tried to put them back together, but only made out a few words. "David, I go." His heart pounded. Emily had written something and destroyed it. He dialed her number again, her answering machine. Then he opened his contacts and called Sarah Wilson, Emily's best friend. Sarah, a school teacher, had known Emily since college and was the only one Emily could confide in. "Hello," Sarah's voice was sleepy. "Sarah, it's David. Is Emily with you? he asked, trying to speak calmly. Emily? No, I didn't see her yesterday. What happened? She went to some work meeting yesterday. She didn't come back. She left her phone at home. I don't know where she is. Sarah was silent for a second. Oh, David, wait. Maybe she's with her colleagues. Have you called anyone at her work? Not yet. Just you. He rubbed his forehead. She left a note, but she tore it up. I found the pieces in the trash. A note? Sarah coughed. Okay, don't panic. I'll be there soon. We'll figure it out. Are you home? Yes. Thank you, Sarah. David hung up and sat on the couch, looking at the scraps of paper. He tried to put them back together, but the words wouldn't come together. Why did she leave without her phone? Without money? And what was that note? By midday, David was sitting in the Fulton County Police Station. Across the table from him sat Officer Martin Gray, a tired-looking man in his 40s. On the desk was a notepad in which he had written down David's words. The station smelled of coffee and paper, and in the next room someone was talking loudly on the phone. So, Mr. Carter, Gray said, leafing through his notebook, your wife left last night around 7 for a work meeting. Is that correct? Yes, David nodded. She said she was going to discuss a new project with colleagues. She promised to be back late. But you didn't specify with whom exactly. Where is the meeting? David shook his head. No, she often stayed late at work. I didn't ask. I thought it was common. Gray wrote something down. Okay, you said she left her phone and wallet. That's weird, I agree. But you found a torn note. What was it? I'm not sure. David pulled out the plastic bag of scraps he'd brought with him. Here, I got what I could. It's got my name, the word go away, but the rest is illegible. The officer took the package and looked at the pieces. We'll try to restore it, but it will take time. You said you had problems in your marriage. David tensed. Well, not exactly a problem. It's just, she wasn't happy. Said she was bored, that life was monotonous. But I thought we could handle it. I see. Gray put his pen down. Mr. Carter, I'll be honest. Without evidence tracks, calls, transactions, there's not much we can do. She could have left voluntarily. Did she have a reason? Maybe someone else? Another one? David frowned. No, I would have known. She would have told me. Gray nodded, but his eyes said he wasn't sure. We'll file a report. Check her phone, bills, hospitals. But if she doesn't want to be found, that complicates things. You said she took her bag. Yes, sports. She sometimes went to the gym with her. Okay, that's a clue. Gray stood up. Go home, try to remember something else. If there's news, I'll call. David left the station feeling even worse. He got into his car, but didn't start the engine. Instead, he dialed Emily's colleague, Lisa, but she said there had been no meeting yesterday. David stared at the steering wheel. Emily had lied. But why? By 8 o'clock that night, David was sitting in Sarah Wilson's apartment, a few blocks from his own. Sarah lived in a small house with a wooden porch covered with books and flower pots. The living room smelled of vanilla from the candles she had lit. There were 2 mugs of tea on the table, but David hadn't touched his. Sarah sat across from him, her legs tucked under her, wearing jeans and a loose t-shirt. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy bun. She looked at David, trying to find the words. She'd known him for almost 10 years, since college, when he and Emily had been inseparable. And to be honest, she'd always liked David. His calm, his intelligence, his habit of pushing up his glasses when he was nervous. But he'd chosen Emily, and Sarah had backed away. Now, seeing his confusion, she felt guilty for her thoughts. David, have you eaten anything? She asked, breaking the silence. He shook his head. I don't want to. I can't think of anything except, where is she? Sarah stood up, walked over to him, and sat down on the couch next to him. Look, the police will find something. Maybe she just went away for a couple of days. She needed time. Time. David looked at her. She left her phone, Sarah, and her wallet. And that damn note she tore up. That's not time. She left. On purpose. Sarah swallowed. Maybe she'll text. Or call. You know Emily, she's impulsive. Remember how she went to New Orleans for the weekend without telling anyone? That's different, he snapped. Then she came back. But now, I don't know if she's alive. Don't say that, Sarah said, touching his hand. She's alive. We'll find her. David looked at her hand, then at her. Why are you so calm? You're her best friend. You should be panicking. Sarah pulled her hand away, feeling her cheeks heat up. I'm not calm. I'm just trying to help. I don't want you to go crazy. He sighed, leaning back against the couch. I'm sorry. I'm not myself. It's just, I thought we could work it out. Even if she was unhappy, I thought we could talk. Sarah nodded, but her insides were clenching. She wanted to say that Emily had complained about their marriage, about how David didn't notice her. But that would have been a betrayal. Instead, she said, let's try calling her friends tomorrow. Maybe someone will know more. In the meantime, stay here if you want. You don't have to sit here alone. David shook his head. Thanks, but I'm going home, in case she comes back. Sarah walked him to the door, her heart pounding. When he was gone, she closed the door and leaned against it. She wanted to help, but part of her, the part she hated, thought about how close he'd just been, and that scared her more than Emily's disappearance. Emily Carter, now Emma Smith, stood behind the bar at the Coral Reef in Miami. It was June 15th, 2019, a Friday night. The room was buzzing with voices and smelled of rum, lime, and French fries. Emily, wearing a black t-shirt with the bar's logo, was serving customers. She was 31, with her hair dyed dark blonde and cut to her shoulders. She waitressed, lived in a cheap motel, and paid cash to leave no trace. Atlanta David, her marketing job, her friend Sarah was a thing of the past. She didn't watch the news, didn't check social media, didn't check for herself on missing persons lists. On the stage in the corner, Ryan Glover was singing a cover of Nirvana. His band, Midnight Drift, was drawing a crowd. Ryan, in a leather jacket, with long hair, was the center of attention. But Emily no longer believed his promises of a new life. He spent their money on beer and parties, and she worked to cover the bills. Tonight, he spent the evening chatting with two girls near the stage, laughing and touching their hands. Emily clutched her tray, watching him. Emma, 2 margaritas for table 5. Bartender Carlos called out, wiping down the counter. Just a second, she said, pouring the cocktails. She carried them to the customers, but her eyes kept returning to Ryan. He leaned toward one of the girls, whispering something, and she giggled. Emily walked back to the counter, dropping the tray. Carlos, I'll talk to Ryan. Cover me. Him again? Carlos rolled his eyes. Okay, go, but quickly. She walked up to the stage, where Ryan was finishing his song. The crowd was clapping. The girls near the stage were screaming. Emily waited for him to come down and grabbed his sleeve. We need to talk, she said, trying to shout over the noise. Ryan wiped the sweat from his forehead and smiled. Hey, Em, what's the rush? The set just started. You've been with those girls all evening. She nodded toward the girls who were still standing nearby. I'm carrying trays, and you're flirting. Is that how it's going to be now? He laughed, waved it off. Come on, they're just groupies. They come to the show, I entertain them. It's a job, Em. Work? She crossed her arms. You promised we'd live, Ryan, and I'm living in a motel and paying for your beer. Ryan frowned and stepped closer. Listen, don't start. I'm working as hard as I can. We'll sign the contract soon and everything will be fine. What are you whining about? I'm not whining, she snapped. I'm tired. You spend everything I earn. When are you going to keep your word? Jesus, Em, he rolled his eyes. If you feel so bad, go back to Atlanta. It was better there, huh? Emily froze. His words hit her because she was asking herself the same question. She turned away, feeling her throat tighten. I have to work, she muttered, and walked back to the counter. Emma, take a break. You're on edge, Carlos said, noticing her face. 5 minutes, and then come back. She nodded and walked out the back door. The air was damp, smelling of the ocean and trash from the alley. Emily leaned against the wall. What if she came back? But the thought of David, of his questions, of their old life, was unbearable. Emma, move it, Carlos shouted from the door. There's a line. I'm coming, she said, tucking the note back into her pocket. She walked back into the bar, but inside she was seething. Ryan had been her choice, but now it seemed like a mistake. In Atlanta, David Carter sat in the office of private investigator Paul Kramer. It was the morning of June 16, 2019. The office was in an old building and smelled of coffee and dust. Kramer, a gray-haired man, was leafing through a file containing a report. David had hired him 3 months ago when the police closed Emily's case. In a year, nothing. No calls, no transactions, no leads. David adjusted his glasses, looking at Kramer. So, what's new? Any leads? Kramer sighed and put the folder down. Mr. Carter, I checked everything. Her phone has been dead since April of last year. The accounts are untouched. I called colleagues, friends, and taxi drivers who worked that night. Zero. Zero? David leaned forward. She couldn't have just disappeared. Someone had to have seen her. I know how hard this is for you, Kramer said, tapping his pen. But she left her phone, her wallet. That suggests she didn't want to be found. Maybe she left with someone. Maybe she started a new life. David clenched his fists. With someone? Do you think she had someone else? I suppose, Kramer replied. There's no evidence for or against it. But people disappear like that when they want to. You said she was stressed? Yes, David hesitated. She said she was bored, that life was monotonous. I thought it was temporary. If she had been dating someone, I would have noticed. Kramer nodded. Maybe so, but I've exhausted my options. Checking further would be a waste of your money. My advice, try to move on. I know it sounds bad, but that's how it happens. Move on, David looked at him. She's my wife. I can't just forget. Nobody's saying forget, Kramer said. But you've been in limbo for a year. Think about yourself. David stood up and grabbed his coat. Thanks, Paul. I'll think about it. If anything comes up, call me. Of course, Kramer replied, but his tone was hopeless. David got out and got into the car. He didn't want to give up, but his strength was fading. He opened his phone and looked at a photo of Emily. They were on the beach 3 years ago. She was laughing. She was happy then, or so it seemed to him. That evening, Sarah Wilson stood outside David's apartment with a container of homemade chili. It was 8 o'clock, and Atlanta was in the twilight. Sarah brought food once a week, knowing David rarely cooked. She told herself it was friendship, helping Emily's friend. But every time she saw him, she felt like she wanted more. She had loved him in college, but he had chosen Emily. Now those feelings scared her. She knocked. David opened the door, his t-shirt wrinkled, his eyes dark. Sarah, he said, stepping back, I wasn't expecting you. Come in. I bought chili, she replied, smiling. You look like you haven't eaten in a week. Well, a couple of days, maybe, he smiled weakly. Thank you. They walked into the kitchen. Sarah noticed dirty mugs in the sink. The apartment hadn't changed in a year, but there was no sign of Emily. Her scarf lay on the shelf, a reminder. How are you? Sarah asked, getting out the plates. Have you been to see the detective? David sat up, rubbing his face. Yeah, he said he couldn't find anything. He said it was time to stop. Sarah froze, holding the spoon. Stop? You mean completely? Something like that. He looked at the table. I don't want to, but... Sarah, I don't know what to do. What if she's dead, or just left and doesn't want to come back? Sarah sat down next to her. David, you did all you could. You can't live like this forever. Emily, she wouldn't want this. He looked at her, his eyes red. Do you really think so? You knew her better than anyone. Would she just leave without saying anything? Sarah looked away. Emily had complained about their marriage, about David not seeing her. But to say so would have been a betrayal. I don't know, she said quietly. But it's not your fault. David nodded, silent. Sarah got up to heat up the chili. She opened the microwave, and their hands accidentally touched as he reached for the plate. They both froze. Sarah felt her cheeks heat up, and she pulled her hand away. Sorry, she muttered, turning away. It's nothing, he said quietly. David Carter sat in a Fulton County courtroom in Atlanta on March 10, 2022. The courtroom was small, with wooden benches and the smell of polish. The judge, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair, was leafing through documents at her desk. David, in a navy blue shirt, fidgeted with his cuff, his palms sweating. He had filed a motion to have Emily, his wife, declared dead under Georgia ACCA Section September 10, 53. 4 years without a word, no calls, no transactions, no trace. The police and private investigator had found nothing. But now, sitting there, he felt his insides tighten. His lawyer, an older man named Henry Lawson, sat nearby, checking notes. The room was almost empty, just a clerk and a couple of people in the far corner. David didn't want Sarah, his girlfriend, there. It seemed too personal. Case number 22134, the judge announced, looking at David. An application to declare Emily Carter dead. Mr. Lawson, what are your reasons? Lawson stood up, straightened his tie. Your Honor, my side has presented evidence that Emily Carter has been missing since April 12, 2018. There is no record of her activity, no bank accounts touched, no phone used, no contact with friends or family. The police closed the case in 2019. My client, David Carter, has met all requirements under Georgia law to declare a missing person dead. The judge nodded, leafing through the folder. Mr. Carter, do you confirm that you have had no news of your wife for 4 years? David swallowed, stood up. Yes, Your Honor. I looked for her. Hired a detective, called everyone I could. Nothing. I understand, she said, her voice even. Any objections or additional evidence? Lawson shook his head. No, Your Honor. The judge closed the file. Based on the evidence presented and pursuant to ACCA Section September 10, 53, the court finds Emily Carter dead. Judgment is effective immediately. The marriage between Emily Carter and David Carter is dissolved. The hearing is adjourned. She banged the gavel. David sat up, feeling his legs buckle. Emily was dead legally. He knew it was a technicality, but the judge's words cut him. He looked at his hands, at the wedding ring he still wore. Lawson patted him on the shoulder. You did what you could, David, he said quietly. Now you can move on with your life. David nodded but didn't answer. He walked out of the room, not noticing the clerk gathering up the papers. It was cool outside, the sky gray. He got into his car and froze, staring at the steering wheel. Emily was gone. But why didn't he feel relieved? That evening, David sat in his apartment, holding a bottle of beer. It was 9 o'clock, and the only light in the living room was a floor lamp. Sarah Wilson sat on the couch next to him, wearing jeans and a sweater, her legs tucked up. She had come in an hour ago, having heard from David about the trial. They had been close for 3 years, and Sarah had become his rock. But in recent months, something had changed her looks, her touch. David sensed it, but he didn't know how to respond. Emily was still on his mind. How are you? Sarah asked, looking at him. Her voice was soft, but there was concern in it. David shrugged, took a sip of beer. I don't know. It's all a blur. The judge said she was dead, and it's real. But I'm still waiting for her to call. Sarah moved closer, put her hand on his knee. David, you've been looking for 4 years. It's not your fault. She's gone, and we don't know why. But you can't live in the past. He looked at her hand, then at her. Her blonde hair fell to her shoulders, her eyes serious. She was right, but that didn't make it any easier. I know, he said, but I promised her I'd be there. Forever. And now, I don't even know if she's alive or not. You kept your word, Sarah said. You did the best you could, and she made a choice. It's not your fault. David set the bottle down on the table and turned to face her. Sarah, you've always been there for me. I don't know how I would have coped without you, but I don't want to hurt you. You deserve someone who doesn't carry baggage. She smiled, but there was sadness in it. You're not luggage, David. You're important to me, and I don't want you to suffer. He looked into her eyes, and something inside him snapped. He leaned in, slowly, as if testing himself. Sarah didn't pull away. Their lips met, and for a second everything was gone: the trial, Emily, the pain. But when they pulled away, David felt a pang of guilt. He turned away, ran a hand through his hair. I'm sorry, he said. I shouldn't have. Sarah touched his cheek, made him look at her. Don't apologize. I wanted this, and you did too, I know. But Emily, he began. Emily's gone, Sarah said quietly, and it's not a betrayal. You're free, David. Give yourself a chance. He nodded but didn't answer. They sat in silence, her hand still on his. David could feel the warmth of her palm, but Emily's face was spinning in his head. He wanted to move on, but he didn't know how. In Miami, Emily Smith, aka Emily Carter, walked into the cramped apartment she shared with Ryan. It was March 11th, 2022, midnight. The apartment smelled of cigarettes and stale pizza. Emily had just finished a shift as a waitress at the Coral Reef bar. Ryan was supposed to perform, but he'd canceled, saying he wasn't in the mood. She was tired, her legs ached, but inside she was seething with anger. She'd learned the day before that their life savings, the $3,000 she'd been saving for a fresh start, was gone. Ryan had lost it all in a poker game. She threw her bag on the floor and turned on the light. Ryan was lying on the couch, in jeans and shirtless, with a bottle of whiskey in his hand. Next to him sat a girl, about 20 years old, in a short dress, with bright red lipstick. They were laughing, not noticing Emily. What's this? Emily said, her voice shaking. Ryan looked up, grinning. Oh, you're home. This is Tina. She's a friend. The girl, Tina, giggled and waved. Hi. Ryan said you were cool. Emily clenched her fists and stepped forward. Cool? Ryan, what the hell is she doing here? And where's our money? Ryan sat down and put the bottle on the table. Hey, relax. Tina came by to chat. And the money? Well, I told you, poker didn't go well. No luck? Emily raised her voice. You lost everything I saved. 3,000, Ryan. I worked while you were partying, and you blew it. Tina stood up and took her purse. I think I'll go. You guys figure this out yourselves. Yeah, go ahead, Emily said without looking at her. Tina left, slamming the door. Ryan stood up and walked over to Emily. Look, don't yell. I'll give the money back. I have a gig next week. They'll pay well. Will you give it back? Emily looked him in the eye. You promised last month. And before that, I'm tired, Ryan. You lie. You hang out with people like Tina, and I pay for your life. He rolled his eyes, picked up the bottle. Oh my God, Em, you're such an old woman. I told you it would be okay. What do you want? For me to go to the factory? I want you to be who you promised, she screamed. You said we would live, not survive in this hole. I left with you, abandoned everything, and you. What about you, princess? He interrupted, stepping closer. You ran away from your perfect life yourself. I didn't make you. If you don't like it, go back to your husband. Emily froze. The word husband hit her like a slap. She thought of David, his glasses on the nightstand, their apartment. She turned away, her eyes burning. I'm not coming back, she said quietly, but I won't stay with you if you do. Ryan snorted, took a sip of whiskey. Do whatever you want, Em. I don't care. Just don't whine. Emily grabbed her bag and walked out of the apartment. She sat on the steps outside the door, looking out at the empty street. Anger mixed with despair. She wanted to get away from Ryan, but where? She had no money, no home. David Carter sat in his downtown Atlanta law office on December 15, 2022. The office was spacious, with wood furniture and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. Walter Bradley, a lawyer in his 60s, sat at his desk, wearing a gray suit, holding a folder of papers marked with the name William Henderson, Emily's grandfather. David had learned of his death 2 weeks earlier, but had not expected to be called on his will. Emily had been declared dead in March, ACA section September 10, 53, and David, though her husband before that, did not consider himself related to her family. He adjusted his glasses, looking at Bradley. "Okay, let's take this one at a time," he said, crossing his arms. "Why am I here?" Bradley opened the folder and pulled out the will. Mr. Carter, William Henderson, died November 20th, 2022. In his 2016 will, he named Emily Carter as his sole heir. David frowned. "Emily? But she was declared dead. How does that work?" "Exactly," Bradley nodded. "Since Miss Carter was declared dead, the Fulton County Court has begun probate proceedings. The will in her favor is invalid, and under Georgia law, the estate goes to the next of kin. As her husband at the time the will was made, you fit that definition." David leaned forward, his voice hardening. "Wait, our marriage ended when she was declared dead. I'm not related. Why not someone else?" Bradley raised his hand. "You were legally her husband when the will was entered into. Mr. Henderson has no other heirs, no children, no brothers, no parents. You are the only one with legal rights." David leaned back in his chair, digesting. "Okay, let's say, what kind of property? A house? Savings?" Bradley smiled and turned the page. Mr. Henderson was wealthy. His assets: a $2 million mansion in Savannah, a $5 million stock portfolio, $3 million accounts, about $10 million in all. David froze, but quickly pulled himself together. "10 million? Are you sure? Where did he get that much?" "He invested in stocks and real estate," Bradley said. "He lived modestly, but he was smart about his finances. After federal taxes, about $900,000, you'd be looking at about $9,100,000. David nodded, his engineer's brain already analyzing. "What's the process? How long will the probate take? And what if?" He hesitated. "If Emily comes back." Bradley shrugged. "Probate will take 3 or 4 months. If Miss Carter shows up, it will create a legal issue, but she's legally dead now. It's unlikely she'll come back after 4 years. Will you sign the papers?" David tapped his fingers on the armrest. "I want to see the will and the valuation of the assets, and I need a couple of days to think about it." "That makes sense," Bradley said, handing over the copies. "Call me when you decide." David walked out, clutching the folder. 10 million. He had been looking for Emily for 4 years, hired 2 detectives, and traveled to cities where she might be. Now her money was falling into his hands. He got into the car, looking at the documents. This was an opportunity, but also a burden. He didn't want to feel like a thief, but he wasn't going to give up until he figured it out. That evening, David sat at the kitchen table in his apartment. It was 7 o'clock, and there was an open bottle of beer and a plate of sandwiches on the table. Sarah Wilson sat across from him, wearing a sweater and jeans, holding a glass of water. They had been dating for 9 months, and Sarah had become his partner in everything from going to the movies to talking about the future. But David still thought about Emily, even if he didn't say it out loud. He told Sarah about his meeting with the lawyer, showing her a copy of the will. She leafed through the papers, her eyes widening. 10 million, she said, looking up. "David, is this real?" "Really," he said, taking a sip of beer. "But I don't know what to do with it. This money is Emily's. I can't just go and spend it." Sarah put the papers down and looked at him. "I understand why you doubt, but Emily is gone. You went through hell to find her. The court said she's dead. It's yours by law." "The law is one thing," David said, setting the bottle down. "But I knew her grandfather. He left it to her. Not to me. If I take it, it'll be like I've betrayed her. Sarah pressed her lips together, though. Okay, let's do it this way. If you don't take it, what happens? Does the money go to the state? Or to someone who didn't even know her grandfather? Do you really want that? David shook his head. No, I thought about it. Maybe give some of it to charity, or invest it in a startup. I always wanted my own company, but I didn't have the capital. Sarah smiled, her eyes lighting up. Now that sounds like you. You can do something big, David. Not just spend it, but create it. A foundation, a business, anything. He looked at her, feeling her enthusiasm contagious. What would you do if you got that kind of money? She shrugged, took a sip of water. Honestly, I'd buy a house somewhere outside the city and maybe open a school or a center for children. But I wouldn't sit there and suffer. Life is short, you know. David nodded, thoughtful. I want to do this right. If I take the money, it won't be for myself alone. Some of it will go to something good, maybe a fund for missing persons, so that others don't have to go through what I did. That's awesome, Sarah said, touching his arm. You can change lives, David, and yours too. We can do this together, right? He squeezed her hand back, nodded. Yes, but I want to check with a lawyer. Make sure there's no catch. And I don't want this to change us. It won't change, she answered, smiling. We're the same, just with a bunch of zeros on the account. David chuckled for the first time that day. He knew the decision wouldn't be easy, but with Sarah by his side, he felt he could handle it. In Miami, Emily Smith stood behind the cash register at the Sunrise Diner, counting tips. It was Saturday night on December 16, 2022. The diner smelled of coffee and fried eggs, and the lights of bars flickered outside. Emily was working a second shift since leaving the Coral Reef 3 months ago. She lived in a rented room, paying cash so no one would find her, not David, not the police. Ryan was still in her life, though she tried to distance himself. Today, she had earned $15 in tips in 7 hours. It was enough to eat, but not enough to dream. She pocketed the money and wiped her hands on her apron. Her partner, Linda, was washing dishes behind the counter. Emma, you're like a zombie, Linda said without looking. Your boyfriend again? Emily sighed and leaned against the counter. Ryan? Yes. He said he got a job yesterday, but I know he's playing cards again. I'm tired, Linda. Then leave him, Linda replied, wiping her plate. He's dragging you down. Find someone better, or just be alone. It's not that simple, Emily said, looking at the cash register. I have nothing. No money, no, nothing. He's all I have left. Linda snorted. Still, girl, he's not your life preserver, he's your anchor. How old are you, 30? 32, Emily lied. She told no one the truth, not even Linda. She was Emma Smith, without a past. There you go, Linda continued. You've got plenty of time. Go away before he finishes you off. Emily nodded, but said nothing. She wanted to leave, but she was afraid. Without Ryan, she would be all alone. She didn't know that her grandfather had died, leaving her $10 million, which now belonged to David. She took a folded note from her pocket, the draft of a letter to David that she carried with her. Her fingers tightened the paper, but she did not unfold it. Linda, I'm done, Emily said, taking off her apron. See you tomorrow. Go and rest, Linda replied, and think about what I said. Emily walked out and toward her room. The street was buzzing. Tourists were laughing. She had no idea that in Atlanta, her inheritance was changing someone else's life. David Carter stood before a small crowd in the garden of a country club in Atlanta on January 14, 2023. It was cool, but the sun was shining and the smell of freshly cut grass filled the air. He wore a navy suit, his tie slightly loosened. Sarah Wilson, his fiancée, stood nearby in a white knee-length dress, holding a bouquet of daisies. Their wedding was small, with 30 guests, just Sarah's close friends and family. David had insisted on simplicity, and Sarah had agreed. They had been dating for almost a year, and after an inheritance from William Henderson, Emily's grandfather, they decided to keep it short. The priest, an older man with a warm smile, read the vows. David looked at Sarah, her blonde hair shining in the sun. He felt joy, but somewhere in his chest, a sadness stirred. Emily, his first wife, declared dead, was still in his thoughts. He had searched for her for 4 years, hired 2 detectives, and traveled to cities where she might be. Now he was building a new life, but her shadow remained. "David, do you agree?" the priest asked, pulling him out of his thoughts. David nodded and squeezed Sarah's hand. "Yes, I agree." The guests clapped, Sarah smiled, and they kissed. Her lips were soft, and for a second he forgot everything. Then they turned to the crowd, and David saw Sarah's mother wiping away tears. His parents hadn't come, they lived in Texas, and didn't approve of a quick wedding after Emily. "So, Mr. Carter, are you officially mine now?" Sarah said, laughing as they walked toward the champagne table. David grinned, adjusted his glasses. "Looks like it, Mrs. Carter. Haven't you changed your mind?" "No way," she replied, clinking her glass with him. "But you owe me a dance." "It's a deal," he said, but his gaze lingered on the empty chair in the corner. He imagined Emily sitting there and quickly looked away. She was gone. He had to move on. After the ceremony, David and Sarah danced to the music of a local band. He held her waist, feeling the warmth of her body. "We did it," he said quietly. "Now what?" "Whatever we want now," Sarah replied. "The house, the kids, your startup. We're free, David." He nodded, but thought about the inheritance. They'd sold their Savannah mansion for $2 million in December, putting half of it into his startup, a company developing AI for businesses. The rest went to a charity for missing people he called Hope. It was Emily's money, but he wanted it to mean more. "You're right," he said, kissing her forehead. "We'll get through this." But deep down, he felt uneasy. What if Emily was alive? He pushed the thought down as he hugged Sarah. Today was their day. In Miami, Emily Smith, aka Emily Carter, was creeping around the dark apartment she shared with Ryan Glover. It was January 15th, 2023. 2 the apartment smelled of cigarettes and spilled beer. Emily, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, was packing her things into an old bag. She had decided to leave. Ryan was getting worse. Gambling, drinking, and yesterday he had punched her in the face when she asked where he had been. That was the last straw. She moved quietly so as not to wake him. Ryan was asleep on the couch, snoring, with an empty bottle of whiskey on the floor. Emily grabbed her clothes, some cash $200 she'd earned at the Sunrise Diner. Her note, a draft of a letter to David, was in her pocket. She didn't take anything that would remind her of Ryan. She opened the closet and pulled out her sneakers, but she tripped over Ryan's old guitar. It fell with a clang. Emily froze, her heart pounding. Ryan stirred, muttered something, but didn't wake up. She exhaled, shoved the sneakers into her bag. What are you doing?" His voice came from the darkness. Emily turned around. Ryan was sitting on the couch, squinting. His hair was disheveled, his eyes cloudy. "I'm leaving," she said, trying not to shake. "That's enough, Ryan. I can't do this anymore." He stood up and took a step towards her. "You're leaving? Where the hell? You have no money, no brains. Are you going to run to your husband?" Emily clutched her bag and stepped back. "It's none of your business. I'm tired of your games, of your hands. You hit me, Ryan." He snorted and came closer. "Hit me? You asked for it, always whining. Where are you going, Em? To the street?" "Anywhere but with you," she answered, looking him in the eye. "You've ruined everything. I was wrong to leave with you." Ryan grabbed her hand and squeezed it. "You're not leaving. You're mine, Em. Without me, you're nothing." Emily pulled away and pushed him. "Get lost. I'm not your thing." He staggered, but did not fall. His face darkened, and for a second she thought he was going to hit her again. But he only laughed, stepped back. "Go ahead, run. Let's see how far you can get." Emily grabbed her bag and ran out of the apartment. She walked down the stairs and outside. The air was warm and smelled like the ocean. She walked to the bus stop, clutching the note in her pocket. Leaving Ryan was scary, but staying was worse. She didn't know where to go, but she decided to start at the new motel. Little did she know that in Atlanta, David and Sarah were building a new life on her inheritance. David Carter sat in his Atlanta office on February 20th, 2023. It was 6 p.m. and dark outside. His startup, Bright Logic, had just launched, and he was reviewing code for a new client. Sarah was home. They'd found out a week ago that she was pregnant. David was happy, but also worried a baby would change everything. He wanted to be a good father, but Emily's shadow was lingering. He opened a drawer to get a pen and saw an old photograph. It was Emily, taken on the beach in 2017. She was laughing, her hair blowing in the wind. David took the photo, feeling a pang in his chest. He remembered looking for her, driving to Charleston thinking he'd seen her on the street. Now he is married, is expecting a child, and running a startup financed by her money. "Why did you leave?" he muttered, looking at the photo. He knew she was probably dead. But sometimes, like now, he wondered, what if she wasn't? What if she was alive and came back? He imagined her pounding on the door, demanding an explanation. He shook his head, shoved the photo back into the drawer. Emily was gone. He had made a choice: Sarah, the baby, a new life. Emily Carter stood outside her old Atlanta apartment on March 5th, 2024. It was 4 in the afternoon, and the air smelled of the rain that had fallen that morning. She held a battered backpack containing only her passport, some cash, and the note she had never sent to David. After running away from Ryan to Miami a year ago, she had worked at a coffee shop, saved up for a plane ticket, and had finally returned. She was 34, her hair blonde again, but longer than before. She didn't know what she was waiting for, but she wanted to see David, to talk, to explain why she had left. She knocked, but there was no answer. The key she had kept secret was still in her pocket. Emily inserted it into the lock, turned it, and clicked. The door opened. She walked in, and her heart sank. The apartment looked strange. There were unfamiliar coats on the rack, and in the hallway were children's sneakers, too small for an adult. On the wall was a photograph. David, Sarah Wilson, her friend, and a baby girl, about 2 years old, with curly hair. Emily froze, looking at them. David was smiling. Sarah was holding his hand. "What the hell?" she muttered, throwing her backpack on the floor. She walked into the living room. Their old sofa had been replaced with a new one, gray, with colorful pillows. On the table were children's books and a cup of half-drunk coffee. Emily opened the closet. Her clothes were gone, replaced by women's dresses and men's shirts. She felt her anger rising. This was her apartment, her life. But now Sarah lives here, with David and the baby. Emily heard footsteps in the hallway and turned around. A woman of about 50, wearing a tracksuit, was standing in the doorway, holding a key in her hand. It was Mrs. Clark, the neighbor from the apartment across the street. "Who are you?" Mrs. Clark asked, squinting. "What are you doing in the Carter house?" Emily swallowed, stepped forward. "This is my apartment. I'm Emily Carter." Mrs. Clark frowned, then her eyes widened. "Emily, oh my God, you. Everyone thought you were dead." Emily froze. "Dead? What are you talking about?" "You were gone for 4 years, Mrs. Clark said, sitting down on a chair. "David looked for you. The police did too. Then the court declared you dead. That was a couple of years ago." Emily felt the floor shift beneath her feet. She sat down on the couch, clutching her backpack. "A trial? Was I declared dead?" "Yes," Mrs. Clark nodded. "David was desperate. He hired detectives, went somewhere. But nothing. And then he started dating Sarah. They got married, they have a daughter, Livia. And a year ago," she hesitated, "he got a lot of money. From your grandfather, I think." Emily looked up. "Grandfather? William Henderson?" "Exactly," Mrs. Clark said. "They say millions. David sold a house in Savannah, started a business. They live in a big house now, and they rarely come here. Emily clenched her fists. Millions? My millions? And he's with Sarah in my house? Mrs. Clark shrugged. Well, legally you know. But you're alive, so it can be fixed, right? Emily stood up, anger overpowering despair. Fix it. He stole my life, my money, and Sarah, she was my friend. Don't shout, Mrs. Clark said, standing up. I don't know what's going on, but David's not a bad guy. He thought you were gone for good. Talk to him. Emily shook her head. No, I won't talk. I'll get mine back. She grabbed her backpack and walked out, ignoring Mrs. Clark. Outside, she paused, looking at the familiar yard. David, Sarah, the daughter, the millions. Her grandfather had died, and she hadn't even known. She felt betrayed, robbed. She would find a way to get the money back. Emily sat in the Brew Haven Cafe in downtown Atlanta on March 6, 2024. It was 2 in the afternoon, and the smell of coffee and baked goods filled the room. She held a cup of black coffee, looking at a notepad where she had written down the address of a lawyer she had found online. She had met with Lisa, a former colleague at the marketing firm, the day before after speaking with Mrs. Clark. She had called Lisa in the morning to clarify the details and was now waiting for her in the cafe. Emily opened her notebook and wrote, Lawyer, court, inheritance. She didn't know how to get the money back, but she was ready to fight. The door of the cafe opened. Lisa entered in a business suit with a bag over her shoulder. She noticed Emily, came over and sat down. Oh my God, Emily, you're really alive, Lisa said, putting her bag down. I didn't sleep all night last night. I thought it was a dream. Emily pushed her cup away. Not a dream. I came back, and I found out that David took my money. And Sarah, how could she? Lisa sighed and ordered coffee from the waiter. Look, I know you're angry, but David searched for you for years. He was broken. Sarah supported him. They didn't know you were alive. Supported? Emily raised her voice, but then lowered it. She slept with my husband, Lisa, and now they have my house, my life, my millions. Lisa shook her head. Not your house, Emily. You left. Without a word. They thought you were dead. The court said so. And the money, I heard your grandfather left a will. But you were dead, legally. David got it legally. Legally? Emily slammed her fist on the table, spilling coffee. It's my money, my grandfather, I'm alive, and I'll prove it. The waiter brought Lisa coffee. She waited for him to leave. Okay, let's say, what do you want? To sue? Do you know how much it costs? And the time? I don't care, Emily said, wiping her coffee with a napkin. I'll find a lawyer. I saw an ad for Matthew Jenkins. He takes on inheritance cases. I'll start with him. Lisa sipped her coffee and looked at her. Emily, I don't want to scare you, but it's not easy. David didn't steal. He thought you were gone forever. And they have a daughter. Do you really want to ruin everything? Emily froze, remembering the photo in the apartment. The girl, Livia, she felt a pang of guilt, but pushed it away. They ruined my life, Lisa. I didn't ask them to steal my money. I want what's mine. Lisa nodded, but her eyes were hard. Okay, but be careful. David's not a pushover. He's built a business. He's got connections. And Sarah, she won't give up easily. Let them try, Emily said, clutching her notebook. I'm not leaving until I get mine back. Lisa finished her coffee and stood up. I have to go to work. Call me if anything happens. But think about it, Emily. It's not just about money. It's about people. Emily Carter sat in the Atlanta office of attorney Matthew Jenkins on March 10, 2024. The office was cramped, smelling of paper and old carpet. Jenkins, a man in his 40s in a rumpled suit, had stacks of files and a coffee mug on his desk. Emily had found him through an online ad for probate litigation specialist. She had $200 in cash, her passport, and the determination to reclaim her grandfather's inheritance. She had rented a room at a cheap motel and was ready to fight. Jenkins looked at her, frowning. So, Miss Carter, you're saying you were declared dead in 2022, but you're alive and want your inheritance back? Yes, Emily said, sitting up straight. My grandfather, William Henderson, left me 10 million. My ex-husband, David, took it because I was gone. I didn't know I'd been declared dead. Jenkins put his passport down and picked up a pen. It's unusual, but not impossible. We need to file 2 lawsuits in Fulton County to vacate your death certificate and to contest the distribution of your estate. The first step is easier. Your passport and possibly a DNA test will confirm your identity. The second is harder. The probate is closed, the assets are distributed. Are you prepared for the long process? Emily clutched the backpack in her lap. How much is this? I don't have much money. I'll take 30% of what we win, Jenkins said. If we lose, you pay nothing but court fees, about $1,000. Agreed? Emily nodded, even though $1,000 was a fortune to her. I agree. What should I do? First, we'll file a petition to revoke your status, he said, opening his laptop. You'll need to take a DNA test, provide documents. Who can confirm your identity? Lisa, my colleague, Emily answered. She knew me before I left, maybe the neighbors. Jenkins wrote it down. Okay, I'll get the papers ready. Sign here. He moved the contract. And one more thing, your husband, David Carter, will be notified. He may resist. He has a business, money, and lawyers. Are you sure? Emily took the pen and signed. He stole my inheritance. I won't back down. Jenkins nodded, put the contract away. Then let's get started. I'll request a DNA test through the court. Come tomorrow, I'll give you the address of the clinic. Emily stood up, determination wiping out her fear. Thank you. I will. She walked out of the office, clutching her backpack. The street was humming with traffic, but Emily didn't notice the noise. She had started the fight, and there was no turning back. David Carter sat in his home office in his new home outside Atlanta on March 15, 2024. It was 7 p.m. and dark outside. His startup, Bright Logic, was growing, and he was preparing a presentation to investors. On the table were papers, a laptop, and a cup of cold coffee. Sarah, his wife, was in the living room with their 3-month-old daughter, Livia. Their life was full business, family, the Hope Foundation, a charity funded by Emily's inheritance. But today, everything was different. David held the Fulton County Courthouse subpoena that had arrived that morning. Emily Carter's petition to annul her status as deceased and claim her estate back. Emily was alive. She was back. He reread the document, his pulse quickening. 4 years without a word, and now she wanted back the money he'd invested in the startup, the house, the foundation. Sarah walked into the office, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, carrying Livia. David, are you okay? She asked, noticing his face. You've been quiet all day. David put the summons down and looked at it. Emily's back, Sarah. She's suing. She wants her inheritance back. Sarah froze, clutching Livia. Emily? Alive? How do you know? Here, he handed over the summons. Court. She demands to cancel her status and take back the money. 10 million that belonged to her grandfather. Sarah sat down in a chair, leafing through the document. Oh my God, David, is this true? She just showed up. It seems so, he said, standing up. I don't know where she's been, but she wants it all back. Our house, our business, our foundation, all on that money. Sarah looked at him, her voice shaking. What now? We have to give it up. This is our home, David, our life, Livia, and she's gone. David walked up to her, put his hand on her shoulder. No one's taking anything. I'll call the lawyer, Elizabeth Thorne. She'll figure it out. We followed the law. Emily's gone, declared dead. We didn't steal. Sarah shook her head, shaking Livia. But she was my friend, David. I feel guilty. We live on her money, and she— Don't start, he interrupted, his voice hardening. It's not your fault. I've been looking for her for years, detective stories, trips, everything. She ran away without saying a word. We built this life honestly. I won't let her destroy us. Sarah looked at him, her eyes shining. And if she wins, what then? Do we lose everything? David clenched his fists and walked back to the table. She's not going to win. Probate is closed. The money's been distributed. But, damn, Sarah, I didn't see this coming. I thought she was dead. Sarah stood up and walked over to him. Me too. But we can do this, right? We're a team. He nodded, hugged her, and Livia. Yes, I'll figure it out. I'm calling Elizabeth tomorrow. We'll protect ours. But inside, he felt turmoil. Emily was alive. He wanted to know where she was, why she was gone. But more than that, he was afraid that her return would destroy everything he had built. Emily Carter sat in a clinic in Atlanta on March 20th, 2024. It was 10 in the morning, and the room smelled of hand sanitizer and plastic. A nurse, a woman in a blue coat, was preparing a DNA test kit the court had ordered to confirm her identity. Emily held her passport, her fingers fiddling with a cover. She had filed a petition through Jenkins, but the bureaucracy was infuriating. The paperwork, the forms, the waiting. She wanted to move fast, to reclaim the inheritance that David and Sarah, her former friend, had taken. The nurse wiped her cheek with a cotton swab. "Open your mouth, please," she said. Emily obeyed, feeling the cold of the tampon. She looked at the wall where the health poster hung, but her thoughts were in the past. She remembered the apartment in Atlanta where she had lived with David. Their dinners, his glasses on the nightstand, their fights. She had left with Ryan, thinking she would find freedom. Instead, there were motels, debts, his fists. Now David was living her life with Sarah and their daughter. Emily clutched her passport, feeling angry. "It's done," the nurse said, sealing the swab in a bag. "The results will be in a week. The court will receive them directly." "How much exactly?" Emily asked, closing her mouth. 5 to 7 days, the nurse replied. "Depends on the lab." Emily nodded and stood up. "Thank you." She walked out of the clinic and sat down on a bench near the entrance. There was a note in her pocket, a draft of a letter to David that she had been carrying for years. She took it out and unfolded it. "David, I'm sorry. I'm suffocating. Don't look for me." She had written it before she ran away, but she hadn't left it. Now she regrets it. If she had explained, maybe things would have been different. But her anger overrode her guilt. David had taken her money, Sarah had taken her place. She would not forgive. "Emily?" a voice said next to her. She turned around. Lisa, her former colleague, was standing with a bag from the pharmacy. "Lisa," Emily said, hiding the note, "what are you doing here?" "I was picking up the medication," Lisa answered, sitting down. "And you? The DNA test?" "Yes," Emily nodded. "The court demands that I prove that I am me. The bureaucracy is infuriating." Lisa looked at her. "Listen, I heard you filed a lawsuit against David. This is serious, Emily. Are you sure?" Emily clutched the note in her pocket. "He took my money, Lisa. My grandfather left it to me. And now he has a business, a house, and a child with Sarah. They stole my life." Lisa sighed. "I know you're angry, but David didn't know you were alive. He was looking for you, really. And Sarah, she didn't mean any harm to you." She didn't want to. Emily raised her voice. "She slept with my husband. She lives in my house. It's not— She didn't want to. It's betrayal." Lisa raised her hand. Okay. I'm not defending them. But a trial is a war. Are you ready? David has lawyers' money. What do you have?" "I have the truth," Emily said, looking into her eyes. "I'm alive, and I'm not stopping." Emily Carter sat in the Brew Haven Cafe in downtown Atlanta on April 5, 2024. It was 2 p.m., and the room smelled of coffee and freshly baked pastries. She flipped through a notebook where she had jotted down her plan of action. DNA test ready, trial April 7th, attorney meeting tomorrow. Emily had finished her coffee when the door to the cafe opened. She looked up and froze. Sarah walked in, wearing jeans and a sweater, pushing a stroller with a sleeping baby in it. Emily recognized her immediately, the Sarah they had been friends with in college, who was now sleeping with her husband and raising his daughter. Sarah headed for the counter without noticing Emily. Emily clutched her notebook, feeling the blood pounding in her temples. She stood up and walked over to Sarah, who was standing at the cash register. "Sarah," she said, her voice cold. Sarah turned around, her eyes widening. "Emily, oh my God, you're there. Did you think I was really dead?" Emily crossed her arms, looking at the stroller. "Cozy, huh? My husband, my money, even the baby." Sarah turned pale and stepped back. "Emily, wait. It's not like that. I didn't know you were alive." "You didn't know?" Emily raised her voice, and people at the next tables turned around. "You slept with David while I was in hell. You stole my life, Sarah." The waitress behind the counter cleared her throat. "Ladies, please be quiet." Sarah looked at her, then at Emily. "Let's sit down," she said quietly. "No need to shout. Livia's asleep." Emily snorted, but followed Sarah to a table by the window. Sarah parked the stroller and sat down, her hands shaking. "Emily, I didn't steal anything," she began. "You left." Without a word. David was devastated. He'd been looking for you for years, mysteries, trips. I was just helping him. Helped? Emily leaned forward. "You interfered with my family. You knew he was my husband." Sarah pressed her lips together, her voice hardening. "Your husband? Emily, you left him. Without a note, without a call. He thought you were dead. The court decided so. I was there when he lay awake at night, when he blamed himself. And where were you? Living your freedom." Emily clenched her fists, hurt. "You don't know what I've been through. I didn't want to leave him. I'm confused. But that doesn't give you the right to take what's mine." Sarah looked at Livia, then at Emily. "I didn't take him. I loved him, Emily. And he loved me. We built a life. We have a daughter. Do you really want to ruin that?" Emily glanced at the stroller. The girl was asleep, her curls sticking out from under her hat. She felt a pang of guilt, but her anger was stronger. "You live on my money, Sarah. My grandfather left it to me. Not to you, not to David. To me." Sarah shook her head. "The money? David didn't want it. He was in pain, but the law gave it to him. He put it into his business, into a fund for missing people. He did good, Emily. And you want to take it all away?" "Good," Emily laughed, her voice shaking. "He stole my inheritance. You live in luxury while I count pennies in a motel." Sarah stood up, her eyes shining. "You left, Emily. You chose. Don't blame us for moving on. If you want to sue, sue. But don't expect me to apologize." Emily stood up too, looking her in the eye. "I'm not waiting. I'm going to take what's mine, and you can't stop me." Sarah took the stroller and walked out without looking back. Emily stood in a Fulton County courtroom on April 7th, 2024. It was 10 in the morning, and the room smelled of polish and paper. The judge, a man in his 50s in a black robe, sat at his desk, leafing through documents. Matthew Jenkins, her attorney, was at her side, adjusting his tie. Today was the hearing of a motion to vacate her status as deceased, ACCA Section September 1st, 53. DNA testing had confirmed her identity, and Lisa's passport and affidavit had been filed. Emily clutched her backpack, feeling determined. "Case number 24189, the judge announced. Motion of Emily Carter to vacate her declaration of death. Mr. Jenkins, what are your arguments?" Jenkins stood up. "Your Honor, my client, Emily Carter, was wrongly declared dead in 2022. We have provided DNA evidence, a passport, and witness statements confirming her identity. We ask that the decision be vacated and her rights restored." The judge nodded and looked at Emily. Miss Carter, do you confirm that you have been absent since 2018 and have had no contact with your family? Emily stood up, her voice level. Yes, Your Honor. I left for personal reasons. I didn't know I'd been declared dead until I returned in March. I see, said the judge, leafing through the folder. Any objections? The clerk shook his head. No, Your Honor. The defendant, David Carter, was served but did not appear. Emily glanced at the empty pews. She expected to see David, but his absence made her even more angry. He ignored her as if she didn't exist. The judge closed the file. Based on the evidence, including the DNA evidence, the court vacates Emily Carter's declaration of death under OCA section September 11th, 53. The judgment is effective immediately. The next probate action will be heard separately. The hearing is adjourned. He banged the hammer. Emily exhaled, feeling relief. She was alive again legally. Jenkins smiled, clapped her on the shoulder. The first step has been taken, he said. Now the inheritance. It will be more difficult, but we are on the way. How long will we have to wait? Emily asked, taking her backpack. A month or two before the hearing, he replied. David will hire a lawyer. Get ready for a fight. Emily nodded and walked out of the room. Outside, she paused, looking at the gray sky. She had beaten the system, but David and Sarah were ahead. She didn't know how far she would go, but she wasn't going to back down. Emily sat in her motel room on April 8, 2024. It was 9 o'clock at night, and the room smelled of damp and cheap soap. On the bed was an old laptop she'd bought for $100 from a coworker at the coffee shop. She logged into social media using a fake account for the first time in years. She needed to know how David and Sarah were doing. She found Sarah's profile full of photos. Sarah and Livia on the carousel, Livia with a doll, Sarah and David at the opening of the Bright Logic office. Emily stopped on a photo of Livia, a girl, 3 months old, with curls and a smile. Emily felt a pang of guilt. It wasn't Livia's fault. She could have been her daughter if things had turned out differently. But her anger overrode her sympathy. Sarah and David lived on her money in luxury while she hid in Miami, tolerating Ryan. Emily opened a chat with Lisa and typed, "How do I find out where they live?" Lisa responded a minute later, "Emily, don't be stupid. Their address was on the news suburban Oak Grove. But why do you need it?" Emily closed her laptop without answering. She wanted to see their home, their life. Emily Carter stood at the stand in the Fulton County courtroom in Atlanta on July 15, 2024. It was 9 a.m., and the courtroom smelled of coffee and furniture polish. Judge Martha Harris, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair, sat at her desk, leafing through documents. Emily, wearing a black jacket and white blouse from a thrift store, clutched the edge of the stand. Her attorney, Matthew Jenkins, sat to her left, ready to fight. Across the table at the defense were David Carter, her ex-husband, and his attorney, Elizabeth Thorne, a woman in a sharp suit. Jenkins stood up, straightened his tie. Your Honor, my client, Emily Carter, is the legal heir of William Henderson. The 2016 will clearly name her as the sole beneficiary. She was unaware of her legal death or that of her grandfather, as she was in difficult circumstances. We ask that the time limit for acceptance of the estate be reinstated and that the $10 million be returned to her. Judge Harris nodded, looked at Emily. Miss Carter, tell the court where you have been since 2018 and why you have not been in contact with your family. Emily swallowed, her voice steady but shaking inside. I left Atlanta in April of 2018. I was in a crisis. My marriage to David Carter. We were growing apart. I felt like I was suffocating. I met this man, Ryan Glover, and I moved to Miami with him, thinking I'd find myself. The courtroom was silent, except for the scraping of the judge's pen. Emily continued. I lived under the name Emma Smith, waitress, paid in cash so I wouldn't be found. I didn't watch the news. I didn't use social media. Ryan, he wasn't who I thought. He drank, gambled away money, and became aggressive. I left him in 2023, returned to Atlanta in March 2024. That's when I learned I had been declared legally dead and that David had inherited my grandfather's money. The judge looked at her. You have not tried to contact your husband or family in 6 years? Emily looked down. No, Your Honor. I was afraid. I thought David wouldn't understand. He'd judge me. I wanted to start over, but I was wrong. Jenkins nodded at her, sat down. Emily looked at David. He was sitting up straight in his suit, his face set in stone. She felt a pang of guilt, but her anger was stronger. He had taken her money, her life. The judge turned to Thorne. Miss Thorne, your questions? Elizabeth Thorne stood up, her voice calm but sharp. Miss Carter, do you confirm that you left Atlanta voluntarily without notifying your husband? Emily nodded. Yes. And in 6 years you never called, wrote, or checked the news? Thorne stepped closer, holding the folder. No, Emily said, clutching the podium. I wanted to disappear. Thorne opened the folder. My client, David Carter, hired 2 detectives, drove around town looking for you. He filed a missing persons report, then filed a lawsuit to have you declared dead, allowing him to receive your inheritance through probate in 2022. Were you aware of your grandfather's will? No, Emily answered. I didn't know he was so rich. He lived modestly. Thorne nodded, her eyes narrowing. And you didn't know that the deadline to accept an inheritance in Georgia is 6 months after the testator's death. You missed it by a year and a half. Why should the court reinstate it for you, given your irresponsibility? Emily gritted her teeth. I didn't know he was dead. I didn't know I was declared dead. It's not irresponsibility. I was lost. Thorne raised an eyebrow. Lost? You were living with another man, Miss Carter, while your husband was looking for you. You were deliberately hiding. That's no excuse for missing a deadline. I object, Jenkins said, standing up. My client doesn't have to justify her personal decisions. She didn't know her rights. I second that, the judge said. Miss Thorne, stick to the facts. Thorne nodded, but continued. Miss Carter, your grandfather's assets have been distributed. The mansion has been sold. The money has been invested in businesses and charities. You are asking for $10 million, which no longer exists in its original form. How do you propose to repay it? Emily looked at David, then at the judge. I don't know how, but it's my money. He had no right to take it. Thorne returned to the table. No further questions, Your Honor. Emily sat up, feeling her hopes fading. Thorne was hard and her words were to the point. She looked at David, but he didn't meet her gaze. Elizabeth Thorne grilled Emily again, going over the details of her escape. Emily held her ground, but she felt the tension growing. Thorne highlighted each slip-up, the lack of contact, living with Ryan, missing her deadline. Emily answered, but her voice shook. Miss Carter, Thorne said, holding up a copy of the will. You say you didn't know your grandfather was rich, but you knew he left a will. No, Emily repeated. He never talked about money. I thought he only had a house. And you made no attempt to learn about him for 6 years? Thorne looked at the judge. Your Honor, my side finds that Miss Carter has knowingly evaded her obligations, including her right to inheritance. The time has expired. The assets have been distributed in good faith. We ask that the suit be dismissed. Jenkins protested, but Emily felt disappointment rising. She looked at David. He sat silently, his face unreadable. She wanted to scream that he had betrayed her, but she kept silent. Judge Harris adjourned the hearing for the next day. Emily walked out of the courtroom, her legs trembling. Jenkins caught up with her. You held up, he said, but Thorne knows his stuff. We need witnesses to show you didn't know your grandfather was dead. Emily nodded, but inside she was seething. She wanted to believe that the court was on her side, but the facts were against her. David Carter stood in the courtroom corridor, holding a bottle of water. It was 12 o'clock, and the courtroom was empty. He loosened his tie, looking at the door where Emily had just left. For the first time in 6 years, he saw her older, thinner, but still Emily. His first wife, the one he had sought before he had lost hope. Now she sat in the courtroom, accusing him of theft. He felt tension mixed with anger. He remembered the night she left, April 2018. He was working on a project, and she said she was going to a meeting with colleagues. He didn't notice her packing her bag, leaving her phone behind. While his life was on hold, the search, the detectives, the trial, she was with her lover, Ryan. That word, spoken in court, cut him. She had run off with another man while he was going crazy, blaming himself. He remembered driving to Charleston, thinking he'd seen her, hiring a second detective when the first had given up. And she was living in Miami under a false name with Ryan. David, Elizabeth Thorne's voice brought him out of his thoughts. She was standing next to him, holding a folder. "Are you okay?" He nodded, took a sip of water. "Yes, it's all so complicated." "I understand," Thorne said, "but it won't matter in court. Her case is weak. The time limit for accepting the inheritance has expired. The money has been distributed. We'll prove that you acted in good faith." "And if she wins?" he asked, looking at her. "Then what? My business, my foundation, our house, all on that money." Thorne shook her head. "She won't win. Courts don't like to violate sealed probates. But we have to be prepared. She can appeal." David squeezed the bottle. "I won't let her destroy what we built. Sarah, Livia, my startup is my life. Emily is gone. She has no right to come back and demand." "I agree," Thorne said. "Tomorrow I'll call witnesses to show how you used the money. We'll win, David." He nodded, but the anger did not go away. He looked at the door where Emily had disappeared. She had betrayed him, run away with her lover, and now she was accusing him. He did not know what secrets she was still hiding, but he was ready to protect his family. Emily Carter sat on the bed of her motel room outside Atlanta. It was 10 o'clock at night, and the room smelled of damp and cleaning fluid. She was reviewing notes for the next day's court hearing, where her lawsuit was continuing. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the door, 3 times. Emily jumped and put down her notebook. She wasn't expecting anyone. She peered through the peephole and saw Ryan Glover, her ex from Miami, wearing a tattered leather jacket and a crooked grin. She opened the door with a chain. "What the hell are you doing here, Ryan?" she asked, trying to sound firm. Ryan leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets. "Hey, Em, saw your show on the news. Woman back from the dead, wants millions, cool, huh? Reporter spilled the beans on where you were hiding. Thought I'd stop by." Emily clenched her fist, feeling fear. "Go away. I don't want to see you." He chuckled, his eyes narrowing. "Don't rush it. I know how you play the courtroom game. Poor Emily didn't know about Grandpa, about the millions. But I can tell you other things, like how you knew he was dead, but ran away to avoid paying your debts. I have old text messages where you say you don't want the inheritance. The judge will like that." Emily froze, her throat tightening. "That's a lie. I didn't know he was dead. You don't have any messages." Ryan pulled out his phone and showed the screen with the fake chat. "Really? Looks convincing. 10 grand, Em, and I'm not going to say anything. You don't want to lose over something like that." "I don't have any money," she said, looking him in the eye. "And I don't believe your bullshit. You're bluffing, Ryan. As always." He stepped closer, his voice lower. "Bluffing? I'm in debt, Em. I've got nothing to lose. I already talked to a guy who knows your husband's lawyer. One call and your case is over. Think about it." Emily took off the chain, opened the door wider, her voice shaking with anger. "It seems you haven't changed. You lie, you threaten. If you go to court, I'll tell you how you beat me, how you stole my savings. Who will they believe, Ryan? Me, with my passport and DNA, or you, with your debts?" Ryan backed away, but the smirk didn't disappear. "I'm not leaving. 10 grand, or I'll talk to Carter's lawyer. You've got until tomorrow." Emily slammed the door, locked it. She sat on the bed, her hands shaking. Ryan might be lying, but his threat was scary. If the judge believed she knew about the will, her case would fall apart. Emily sat in the Fulton County courtroom, fiddling with the sleeve of her jacket, her eyes darting toward the door. She was afraid Ryan would come in, present his forgeries. David and his attorney, Elizabeth Thorne, were across from her, their faces calm. Emily hated their confidence, but her fear of Ryan was greater. The judge looked at Jenkins. "Mr. Jenkins, your witnesses?" Jenkins stood up. "Your Honor, we call Lisa Parker, Miss Carter's former colleague, to confirm her identity and condition prior to her departure." Lisa walked in, wearing a gray suit, and sat on the stand. Emily listened to her testimony about her work in 2018, about how Emily had seemed depressed. But her thoughts were on Ryan. She imagined him standing up, showing the fake texts, saying what she knew about her grandfather. Her palms were sweaty. "Miss Parker," Thorne asked, standing up, "did Miss Carter mention her grandfather or his finances before she left?" Lisa shook her head. "No, she rarely talked about family at all." Thorne nodded, looking at Emily. "What about someone else, like Ryan Glover?" Emily tensed. Lisa hesitated. "No, she didn't mention anyone in particular." Thorne smiled and returned to the table. No more questions. Emily whispered to Jenkins, "They know about Ryan. What if he's already talked to them?" Jenkins frowned. "From where? Is there something you didn't say?" "No," she replied, looking away. "It's just, he might be lying." "If anything comes up, tell me," he said. "We have to be ready." The judge called a break. Emily walked out, fear clenching her chest. She looked at David as he walked toward the exit. His gaze was cold. She knew he was angry, and she was afraid Ryan would make things worse. David Carter sat in the living room. Sarah Wilson, his wife, had put Livia to bed and was now sitting on the sofa, holding a mug of tea. David, in jeans and a shirt, was scrolling through messages on his phone. Elizabeth Thorne had revealed today that Ryan Glover, Emily's lover, had contacted their private investigator through an intermediary, offering to testify against her. He claimed that Emily knew about her grandfather's death and had refused to inherit. Thorne doubted his credibility, but she wanted to use it. David was seething with anger. "David, you're silent again," Sarah said, putting down her mug. "Trial? What's going on?" He put the phone down, looked at her. "Ryan Glover, the one Emily ran away with. Thorne says he wants to testify, says she knew about the will, but didn't want it because of her debts. It could kill her lawsuit." Sarah frowned, sitting closer. "Ryan, that musician from the court, does he really know something?" "I don't know," David said, his voice hard. "But I don't trust either of them. She was living with this guy while I was hiring detectives, going to Charleston, thinking she was dead, and now she's asking for my money, and this Ryan is messing with our lives." Sarah touched his arm. "David, calm down. If he can help, let him talk. Why are you so angry?" "Because he was with her, Sarah." David stood up, his voice growing louder. "I blamed myself for 6 years, and she was with that loser. And now he can stand up in court and tell me how they lived while I was looking for her. I don't want to hear it." Sarah sighed and stood up. "I understand. But if he ruins her business, it's good for us, right?" David shook his head, sat up. "I don't want him in our lives. He's part of her lie. But Thorne's right. If he's telling the truth, it's the end for Emily. I'm angry, Sarah." Sarah hugged him. "We can do this. You're strong, David." August 3rd, 2024. Judge Harris cleared her throat and looked around the courtroom. Case number 24190, Emily Carter v. David Carter. The court has considered all the evidence, including William Henderson's will, the witness statements, and the circumstances of the plaintiff's absence. Emily held her breath, her fingers digging into the table. Jenkins touched her hand, whispering, "Hold on." The judge continued, her voice level. "The plaintiff, Emily Carter, has established her identity and her status as deceased has been vacated. However, The claim to reinstate the time limit for acceptance of the estate is questionable. Under ACA Section May 21st 53, the time limit is 6 months after the decedent's death. Miss Carter has been missing since 2018 and has not provided convincing evidence that she could not have known of her grandfather's death in 2022. Emily felt her heart sink. She looked at David, who was sitting up straight, not looking at her. Furthermore, said the judge, the assets have been distributed in good faith. The mansion has been sold, the proceeds have been invested in business and charity. The court finds no grounds for reinstating the term. Miss Carter's claim is dismissed. Emily froze, her eyes filling with tears. She heard Jenkins exhale, but the judge's words drowned it all out. However, Harris continued, given the circumstances, the court recognizes the plaintiff's moral right to a portion of the inheritance. The defendant, David Carter, is ordered to pay Miss Carter $80,000 in compensation from his own funds within 6 months. The case is closed. The hammer struck. Emily covered her face with her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. $80,000 instead of $10 million. She had lost. She felt the disappointment like a heavy weight. Jenkins put his hand on her shoulder. "Emily, this is not the end," he said quietly. "We can appeal." She shook her head, not taking her hands away. "It's not fair. It's my money." Thorne and David stood, gathering papers. Emily looked at him through her fingers. He didn't turn around as he walked away with Thorne. She wanted to scream, but her throat tightened. She had lost to the law, to reality, to David. David Carter sat at the kitchen table in his suburban Atlanta home on August 3, 2024. It was 6 p.m., and the smell of coffee and baby food filled the kitchen. Sarah Wilson, his wife, was feeding Livia, their 3-month-old daughter, in a high chair. David held his phone, rereading a text message from Elizabeth Thorne. "The verdict is in our favor. $80,000 is the minimum. Congratulations." He felt relieved, but also heavy. Emily had lost, but the $80,000 and her return left questions. Sarah looked at him, wiping her hands. "Well, you've been on edge all day. Verdict." David put the phone down and nodded. "We won." The judge dismissed her case. The time limit expired, the money was distributed. "But I have to pay her $80,000. A compromise." Sarah exhaled and sat down opposite him. $80,000, that's normal, right? "Yes," he said, his voice firm. "We have savings, the business is going well. But Sarah, I don't want to give her anything. She ran off with this Ryan, lived her life, and now she's asking for mine. It's not fair." Sarah frowned, looking at Livia. "I understand, but she was your wife, David. She lost everything, her grandfather, her money, us. Maybe $80,000 is right, so she can start over." David stood up, his face darkening. "Right, Sarah, I've been looking for her for years. Detectives, trips, a trial, I thought she was dead. And she was with her lover while I blamed myself. She doesn't deserve anything." Sarah raised her hand, her voice soft. "Hey, don't yell, Livia's here. I'm not defending her. But she was living hell, you heard her in court. Ryan was beating her, she was hiding. Maybe she was wrong." David sat up, rubbing his face. "Her grandfather's money, not hers. I didn't steal Sarah. I built the business, the foundation, our home. All above board. But, yeah, I get it. $80,000 isn't the end of the world. Maybe that'll close the case." Sarah touched his arm. "You're a good man, David. We'll do this. But what if she doesn't stop?" She looked broken today. David looked at her, his voice hardening. "These are the consequences of her decisions." Emily Carter sat at a rickety desk in her new Atlanta apartment. It was small, 1-bedroom, a kitchen, a thrift store couch, but hers. She'd gotten $80,000 from David Carter after losing the trial, paid rent for a year, and bought a used car. The rest sat in an account, but Emily felt empty. $80,000 hadn't brought back the life David and Sarah Wilson, her former friend, had stolen. She'd appealed, but Matthew Jenkins warned her chances were slim. In front of her lay a piece of paper and a pen. Emily wanted to write to Sarah to apologize for the pain she had caused in court, for her words in the cafe, but pride fought with guilt. She picked up the pen and began. Dear Sarah, I don't know if you'll read this. I didn't mean to ruin your life. I was angry, I was lost. You were my friend, and I. She stopped, crumpled the sheet. Why apologize? Sarah was sleeping with David, living off her grandfather, William Henderson. But the image of Livia, their daughter, wouldn't leave her mind. Emily remembered her curls in the photo, her innocence. She picked up a new sheet, started again. Damn, she muttered as the handle caught. Why is this so hard? She stood up and went to the window. The street was humming with cars, the streetlights were on. Emily thought about Sarah, about her eyes in the cafe, full of pain. She wanted to hate her, but she couldn't. Sarah supported David when Emily ran away with Ryan. It was her mistake, but she had to pay too high a price for it. Sarah, she said out loud, testing the words, I'm sorry I came back, but I couldn't help it. She returned to the table and wrote, I regret the pain I caused, but I do not regret fighting. You do not know what I went through. I wish you happiness. Emily reread the letter, folded it. She wouldn't send it. Her pride was stronger. She stuffed it into her backpack, next to the draft of the letter to David she'd been carrying for years. Maybe someday she'd find the words, but not now. David Carter stood on stage at the Atlanta Civic Center on August 25, 2024. It was 5 p.m., and the room smelled of flowers and plastic chairs. He wore a suit, no tie, and adjusted his glasses. Sarah Wilson, his wife, stood nearby in a blue dress, holding Livia. They were opening a new project for the Hope Foundation, a charity funded by William Henderson's estate. The foundation helped families of missing people and was now launching a crisis hotline. David had decided to increase the budget after the trial to honor Emily's grandfather. In front of them sat journalists, volunteers, and sponsors. David took the microphone. Thank you for coming, he said, his voice confident. The Hope Fund is personal to me. 6 years ago, I lost my wife, Emily Carter. I searched for her, hired detectives, and traveled from city to city. I know what it's like to live without answers. Today, we're launching a hotline so no one feels alone. The guests clapped. Sarah smiled and squeezed his hand. Livia began to whimper, and Sarah whispered, It's time to feed her. Go ahead, I can handle it, David said, kissing her on the cheek. Sarah went backstage and David continued. This project is a tribute to William Henderson, whose legacy made this possible. We have increased funding to help more people. Thank you for your support. He finished and went down to the guests. A reporter, a woman with a notepad, approached. Mr. Carter, how has the Emily Carter trial affected the fund? She appealed, right? David tensed, but smiled. The court is closed. We paid the compensation, and the fund continues its work. I do not comment on the appeal. It is personal. The reporter nodded and wrote it down. David walked away, feeling irritated. Emily had lost, but her appeal hung in the balance. He found Sarah backstage, feeding Livia. Is everything okay? She asked, looking at his face. Reporters, he said, sitting down. Again about Emily. I want this to end, Sarah. She touched his knee. It will end. The judge was on our side. The appeal is her last resort. We did the right thing by increasing the fund. That's important. David nodded, looking at Livia. Yes, but I don't want her in our lives again. We deserve some peace. Sarah smiled. We'll get it. You've gone above and beyond, David. I'm proud of you. He squeezed her hand, feeling relieved. The fund was his way of making amends for Emily's money, but he wasn't going to give in to her again. Emily Carter stood behind a tree in Atlanta's Piedmont Park. It was 3 in the afternoon, and the air smelled of grass and barbecue. She'd come for a walk, to take her mind off the appeal and her job at the coffee shop. But when she turned the corner, she froze. David was pushing Livia's stroller, humming to her. He was wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, his glasses glinting in the sun. Livia was giggling, holding a stuffed animal. Emily felt her throat tighten. She hadn't seen him since the trial, but his face familiar but foreign tugged at old wounds. She hid behind a tree, watching. David stopped at the bench, took out a bottle, and began feeding Livia. He talked to her, laughed, and adjusted her hat. Emily remembered their evenings in the apartment, dreaming about the future. She could have been in Sarah's place, but she had gone with Ryan. Now David was happy without her. "Hey, baby, don't swing," David said, wiping Livia's chin. "Mommy will be back soon." Emily spotted Sarah walking in with 2 coffees. She sat down next to him, kissed David on the cheek. They talked, laughed, their hands touching. Emily felt a twinge of envy, but also regret. They were a family. She had ruined hers, but not theirs. Emily turned away and walked towards the park exit. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.